You're watching The Legal Breakdown. Glenn, the Trump administration made national headlines just a couple of weeks back when they had a judge arrested in Wisconsin. We now have an update as far as that whole process is concerned. Can you explain what just happened?
Yeah, Brian. So we learned today that the grand jury indicted the judge, Judge Dugan, on 2 counts, basically one for helping somebody evade arrest and a second for essentially obstructing the due administration of justice. Now, it's a very short indictment, but she has been arraigned on the charge, and the defense team has already filed a motion to dismiss the charges, claiming 2 things. One, they're claiming she had judicial immunity because she was acting as part of her official duties as a presiding judge, and they also claimed something called federal government overreach. That's kind of a new one. I don't know that that dog will hunt, but what they are alleging is that under the 10th Amendment, the separation of powers as between the federal government and the states, that this is really federal overreach. This is really a state matter, this state court case, and the federal government ought not be able to indict the judge for this conduct. I don't know. That's a bit of a novel claim, and I'm not putting much faith in that one. The judicial immunity, I think, is a viable. It's not a defense. Let me just tell people, it's not a defense to the crime. It's actually an assertion that you may not be prosecuted at all because you have immunity. But here's what I want to do, Brian. I want to drill down on the indictment because it's paper thin. It's barely 2 pages. And here is, in essence, the facts that the federal prosecutors are alleging constitute crimes for which they believe this judge should be prosecuted. So it's in the case of the United States of America versus Hannah Dugan, and they say that the judge knowingly concealed a person, they use the person's initials, EFR, knowingly concealed a person for whose arrest a warrant had been issued so as to prevent the discovery and arrest of that person. That's literally the first criminal count, helping somebody evade arrest. The second criminal count is the obstruction of the proper administration of the law by, here are the facts they allege, confronting members of the ICE task force and falsely telling them they needed a judicial warrant to effectuate the arrest, and she then sent them to the chief judge's chambers to have the chief judge sort this out, whether they had the appropriate warrant and whether they could effectuate the arrest in the courthouse. And then they claim that the judge told the person, EFR, and his counsel to exit the courtroom through a non-public jury door. That's it. That's what they're claiming constitute these 2 criminal offenses that carry up to 6 years combined in aggregate if she is convicted. I got to tell you, Brian, I am not bowled over by the factual assertions in this 2-count indictment. And what I will say is her defense team is made up of a number of attorneys, a former United States attorney, but even more importantly, a really storied and accomplished conservative lawyer named Paul Clement. Who is Paul Clement? He was the Solicitor General, meaning he argued cases before the Supreme Court in the George W. Bush administration, argued more than 100 cases before the Supreme Court. He is a lion, certainly, of conservative justice circles, but really well regarded on both sides of the aisle. I have a feeling Donald Trump's federal prosecutors are going to have their hands full trying to convict Judge Dugan on this evidence.
Glenn, we have spoken quite a bit in the past about how the DOJ is usually very hesitant to bring about any prosecution that they're not virtually assured of winning. That's why the DOJ has such a high success rate in their cases, because the cases that they do deign to bring are ones where they're basically a home run. They have something like a 98 or 99% conviction rate. And so in this instance, is this a retreat away from that longstanding principle where they're not going to take cases that are guaranteed to win? Instead, we have a case here that's basically paper thin.
You know, I don't think we are going to see 99% conviction rates out of Donald Trump and Pam Bondi's Department of
Right.
Justice.
I think that's a pretty good bet to put your dollar on.
These DOJ lawyers that they've been sending into court have been falling flat on their face, and federal court judges are calling them on it. I don't want to mix legal apples and oranges, But I have to say, in the Abrego Garcia unconstitutional deportation case, they are sending in, I hesitate to call them third-rate lawyers because that's an insult to third-rate lawyers. They're sending DOJ lawyers in there who have no experience, who have no business being in court. And the judge, in this case it's Judge Sines, is saying things like, you all are providing the court with, quote, falsehoods, and you all are acting in, quote, willful bad faith. That's the level of lawyering that's going on. I have a feeling some of that may be going on in this federal court in Wisconsin in the judge's case. They're not bringing cases because they're strong on the evidence and they're righteous. They're bringing them for the fear and intimidation value. Oh, you want to do anything to impede our ability to deport people, including unconstitutionally? Well, then we don't care if you're a judge. We don't care if you're a police officer. We don't care if you're a mayor. We'll come after you even though we don't have the goods. Why? Because we want to intimidate everybody into inaction. And it feels to me like this was a prosecution brought to send a message, not a prosecution brought because it was a righteous case on the evidence.
What is the judge's recourse here? Normally, if this was against a private litigant, at least maybe you can countersue. Maybe there are protections with slap suits so that there's some type of a deterrent effect. Maybe they can countersue for emotional distress or other damages in that ballpark. But I don't think that they have the same options available to them when it's the federal government that brings these cases. And so what's to prevent the federal government from just doing this everywhere, knowing that there's really no deterrent effect to prevent them from doing this?
Ordinarily, the fear of shame and embarrassment and exposing yourself as a bad actor who is not loyal to the rule of law or the Constitution has a pretty strong deterrent effect, but not for Donald Trump. Pam Bondi.
This is an administration that's completely shameless.
Exactly. And so I don't even think they care if they lose and if they go down in flames and if the judge says things similar to what we were just discussing Judge Sines said about the DOJ lawyers that get these lawyers referred to bar counsel, maybe sanctioned or disbarred. Donald Trump doesn't care about any of that.
No, they're expendable. He'll get new lackeys to take their place and embarrass them in the courtroom.
But there is a point of diminishing returns, Brian. I think at some point, just a sense of simple self-preservation of these lawyers who are seeing their fellow lawyers go in and fall on their faces one after another, get referred to bar counsel, and perhaps lose their law licenses. At some point, you're probably going to run out of flunkies to send into court. That's why I believe, and I have said this sort of writ large, everything Donald Trump is doing is not sustainable. I understand this is all to feed his dictatorial appetite, but it's not sustainable in the long run. It will all kind of implode. It will fall under the weight of its own nefariousness, but he's doing so much damage in the interim. At some point, the only thing that will deter this, I think, is the federal judges continuing to stand strong, to call it out, to make sure that the DOJ lawyers who are acting in bad faith and offering falsehoods or involved in baseless prosecutions run the risk of losing their law license. And we just have to keep fighting that good fight until they run out of lawyers or Trump runs out of a presidential term.
Well, let's zoom into this judge, this Wisconsin judge in particular. What is her recourse here? Because really, I mean, she gets plucked out of her job, she gets arrested, her economic stability is put in peril, and so is there anything that she can get out of this to make her whole?
She can get the satisfaction of being vindicated in court. I know that doesn't feel like much, but if you are being wrongfully or vindictively or selectively prosecuted, or prosecuted without an evidentiary basis to do it, having a fellow judge stand up and dismiss the case and enter findings perhaps that the government has acted in bad faith and you are fully restored to your position as a judge, that is some vindication. But as you correctly point out, Brian, it's really hard to sue the federal government for prosecuting you even when they do it in bad faith, unless she can establish that these government officials who brought this prosecution acted beyond the scope of their official duties, in essence lawlessly, then they might open themselves up to a civil suit for damages, meaning money. I think that is an outlier, but it's still a possibility.
You'd mentioned that she's assembled quite an impressive legal team, including a solicitor general. What kind of an impact does that have? I mean, I know that the rest of us out here, it sounds good, but what kind of an impact does that actually have in the courtroom when you have legal heft behind you in the form of people who've, argued cases in front of the U.S. Supreme Court?
The name doesn't have any impact at all, certainly not on a judge, and it shouldn't have an impact on a jury. A jury should not take into account, for example, the prestige of one or more of the lawyers representing either of the parties. But here is where it comes into play. Somebody like Paul Clement, who is such an accomplished lawyer, respected on both sides of the aisle, and remember, if that name is familiar to anybody...
It is familiar, and I've been trying to think this whole time, and was he the person that a different judge had called in to argue a case when the federal government was trying to get the Eric Adams case dismissed, and they needed somebody to argue the other side?
Bingo. Federal Court Judge Dale Ho in New York, who presided over the Mayor Eric Adams case, where Donald Trump's Department of Justice, in really just a mind-blowing position to take, said to Judge Ho, "Oh, we want to dismiss this case not because Mayor Eric Adams didn't commit all kinds of public corruption crimes, but because we want to free him up to do political favors for Donald Trump." That is as unethical as it gets. And for that, Emile Beauvais, one of Donald Trump's henchmen and former criminal defense attorneys, who's now a high DOJ official, got referred to Bar Council in New York for that unethical conduct. But because there was nobody arguing the case for the people of New York, because that was the position the Department of Justice was taking, they basically were standing shoulder to shoulder with the defendant who they should have been prosecuting. Judge Ho said, "I need a really accomplished, reliable, experienced lawyer to come in and basically take the place of a prosecutor, brief up these issues, and help me work through these thorny legal matters." And he appointed Paul Clement. So yes, even federal court judges so respect Paul Clement that they bring him in as their outside counsel. So listen, $1 is my betting limit, Brian. I'm not a high roller. I'm not a gambling man. I'm going to put the full buck. I might even push it to $1.05 on Paul Clement and the legal team that Judge Dugan has running circles around Donald Trump's third-rate DOJ lawyers.
Right. I mean, at the end of the day, even if the name isn't enough to lend itself to some atmospheric advantage or some advantage as it relates to the jury, knowing that he knows what the hell he's doing in the courtroom, that he's that good, that everybody in the legal profession at least respects him, compared with the judges who Trump is bringing forward, which is these bottom-of-the-barrel attorneys who really risk sanctions every time they step foot in a courtroom because they have to figure out whether they want to show more allegiance to the law and reality or Donald Trump. I mean, the asymmetry there is just massive.
Yeah, quality lawyering is what Paul Clements brings to the table, not just a name.
Okay, well, look, this issue is obviously not going anywhere, and we will continue to stay on top of it. For those who are watching right now, if you want to follow along, please make sure to subscribe. The links to both of our channels are right here on this screen. It's the best way to support our work, and it's the best way to support independent media more broadly. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.